In today's polarized political environment, opposing sides are labeled as hate groups. How is it that the United States of America has become so ununited? We're talking about that next on Significant Insights. Hello and welcome to the program. Good to have you with me today. I have a couple of excellent and well-educated guests, and they're going to discuss and debate the issue of polarization in politics and the culture. Julie Roys is a reporter and media personality, and for more than 10 years she hosted the radio program Up for Debate on Moody Radio. She also has just released her book, Redeeming the Feminine Soul. Dr. Vincent Bacote is an associate professor of theology and the director of the Center for Applied Christian Ethics at Wheaton College. He's also the author of The Political Disciple. According to the Pew Research Center, Republicans and Democrats are more divided than ever. And the difficulty between them is more extensive than at any point in recent history. And that's where we began. There was a time when you had a center where you had people who really understood, both values, and they shared, Republicans, Democrats shared some of the same values. Research is showing that it's moving further and further apart, and that center is becoming less and less. And the polarization, because of not just the economic issues, not just even the health insurance issues, but a lot of this is around the moral and ethical polarization. Julie, how do you see it?
Well, I think you have two very disparate groups in the United States right now, because you have progressives with a completely different worldview. They have a different idea of how mankind can be relieved of his suffering. And for them, it's very much a redistributive model. And the cause of suffering so often isn't sin, as a lot of us would see as Christians. It isn't that. It is the unequal distribution of goods and services. That's the main problem. And they don't see God as being in control. They see it as sort of evolutionary forces are in control. And so there's just not, that worldview is so different than you would say sort of religious America, which still is a lot of America, but I think less and less, where we see, well, no, the problems are really the sin. The problems are things that we can deal with through taking personal responsibility and working together, being cooperative, but yes, also for ourselves, taking responsibility for those and believing that there's a God who is sovereign over all of this that we need to submit to. So when you have such totally disparate views of ultimate reality, who is God, why are we here, what causes suffering, how do we alleviate it, well, then how can you come together? I mean, it's really, really difficult to do that. And I think for the church, it gives us an incredible burden to reach people with the message of Jesus Christ. Now, as Christians, are we all going to agree? Well, no, there's going to be within that, even if we agree that God is sovereign over the universe, there's going to be still different things that we might disagree on how to address the healthcare crisis, for example. Yeah. But we're going to be addressing it at least from an understanding of who mankind is, of who God is, and how we solve things together. And I think that was, if you look at, back to the 50s, maybe the majority of America wasn't Christian, but they had sort of a Christian worldview and outlook.
They had a root. Their roots.
Right.
They had roots, but they also had roots where you could lynch people that looked like me with impunity, and that wasn't a problem, right? So that I don't like going back to the 50s because there never was like a pristine part of the history of the United States if you look like me. So it's better now if you look like me. It was
a problem for a lot of Christians.
It was. So now that said, I remember like 20 years ago I called hey, when did you think things started to go downhill? And I had my relatives say though, that they thought taking prayer out of schools was the hinge. Mm-hmm. So I agree that there was a certain kind of at least cultural assumption that was from the Judeo-Christian ethic. And some would even argue that even there were ways that you had a certain kind of civility, a certain kind of way of operating in society that came from the dominance of mainline Christianity, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, right? So in other words, there was a way that you just do things. And that there's been the erosion of that combined with, so that erosion actually, I would say, goes along with the sort of unveiling of a more naked type of secularist
How
worldview.
telling do you think it was at the Democratic Convention when, in the eyes of America, they had to force a vote to include even the word God in their agenda, and with people screaming, get rid of him, in essence. I mean, that's not the... How telling do you think that was, and how much more do you think that polarized?
I think it's very, very telling, but I think it's also been happening a long time. Like when you say taking prayer out of schools, was it the prayer part that was so big? Well, no, it was the part that basically that was saying we are taking this entire worldview that we have based our education on, and now we're importing another one, because you have to import something. And so we imported secular humanism into the school, right? And so that became the religious system. That became who tells you who you are. That became what answers these major questions. And so when we did that, that to me, and I would agree with your relatives, that was a huge shift, but most of America didn't get it, because most of America was like, well, I still believe in God, my neighbors still believe in God. What they didn't realize is that the secularists were reaching their children, a ton of their children. And I think, and into the evangelical community, we put so much of our energy into politics, right? I mean,
well, it wasn't just put into politics, though. It's also that we abandoned that space so these other people can do that.
I was on a panel a number of years ago with Martin Marty, and I still have today a deep appreciation for Marty. And he made a statement. This is when the moral majority had really first started developing. And he said for the most part, evangelicals have always been pretty quiet about all this. And he said, but we, by our actions, talking about liberals, have brought them out of the woodwork, or have brought them out into the public. And when I stood up, I said, yes, you have. And they're out to stay. And it's going to be hard now to contain them, because they have understood that they have to be out in public. And so I said, we're here, and you're going to be hearing from us. And I didn't realize we're going to be hearing quite this way, but would you agree that it was almost a defensive mechanism?
Yeah. But today, if you go on, I would say, most Christian college campuses, who are the vocal ones? It's not the majority of the conservatives. It's the minority of liberal leaders on that campus that are the most vocal.
Well, no, I don't think that's the case.
We can argue that, but let me just make the point.
Yeah.
The point, I think, is true, that evangelicals have been quiet. However, I do think, like when you talk about what happened at the Democratic Convention, I think that becomes a rallying cry, and it makes a lot of evangelicals feel like, man, we need to be involved in politics. Do we need to be involved in politics? Absolutely. We're supposed to be salt and light. But again, that politics is downstream of culture. And the only, to quote Chuck Colson again, I mean, there are institutions that are able to reform moral behavior. Those are the family and the church, and to some degree, education. The two that can't, that can only sort of stave off the moral decay, are the media and politics. And so we put so much of our effort off and into media and politics, which I think we should, but our majority of our emphasis, I think, needs to go, one, into getting our own house in order. When we have less than 1 in 5 people who identify as born-again Christians with a Christian worldview, then how can we possibly be salt and light in any arena? So I think we need to start there, really educating in the churches, in the home, in the schools, our children, the next generation, as much as we can, with a Christian worldview.
More on our discussion right after the break.
People have something that one study called motivated ignorance, which means people are happy in being in their silos, in their echo chambers, and they're not interested in actually wanting to get to know the truth about other people.
Welcome back. Today I'm talking with journalist Julie Roys and Wheaton College professor Dr. Vincent Bacote, and we're talking about the political and cultural polarization that we're experiencing in the U.S. today. Is there a common ground between the social liberals, the progressive liberals, and the conservative Christians? It's gotten so far afield that I think it's going to be more difficult. You know, when you defy natural law, when you come to a point of arrogance where you define natural law and you say to someone, regardless of your anatomy, regardless of how you were born, you don't have to be that. You decide. I mean, you make that decision. That is an absolute most arrogant possible statement I can imagine.
But that's Enlightenment 101 though, where you have the self-ruling subject. That's just the culmination of going back to, like, you know, arguably Descartes. But
I'd say you go back to Gnosticism.
So when you make that person the self-ruling subject, I mean, and you radicalize that, you get to the point where who decides what truth is? Well, each individual person does. And then if you make it also kind of commodified, I mean, you're making personal preference the one thing that you don't want to challenge. So, and the thing is that that's prominent across the spectrum, left and right. Now, specifically to the question about a commonality, I think there are two things. One, I want to say something about why I think you have that division. Part of the reason we have this division is because people have something that one study called motivated ignorance, which means people are happy in being in their silos, in their echo chambers, and they're not interested in actually wanting to get to know the truth about other people. They're happy being reinforced in what they already believe. And this happens left and right. And of course, there are people who are great communicators who are happy to keep stoking that for people. And there's a certain comfort in feeling like, hey, I'm with my people, we all agree, we all see the world the same way, or we all, in some cases, have common fears and we can identify a common enemy. Now, but I think the fact is that once you get people a little bit out of that and you actually meet somebody who may completely disagree with you, but you table some of the polarizing things for a moment and you actually are just sort of human together for a while. In those kinds of circumstances, even though people disagree with each other, one of the things they discover is, oh wait, you're actually a nice person. Wait, you actually care about your family. Wait, you actually, care about me. And I think
you're more like me than I thought.
Exactly. And I think I would say the burden is on Christians, because Christians are the ones who have the second greatest commandment to love your neighbor as yourself. The burden is on Christians to say, even with the people that disagree with me, what they're going to know about me is that I'm absolutely committed to really treating them like a human being, and I'm not going to avail myself of opportunities to lie about them, to dehumanize them, or to advantage myself at their expense. In order just for me to have power and to have my own comfort. Yeah. So if people see that Christians are really wanting to be people who are, like the song, known by our love, not at the expense of truth, this is really important, known by our love while holding on to conviction, because people left and right, I think, nobody knows how you can do that. I think that is an opportunity that we have right now. But I think that also goes back to that formation that I'm talking about. Yeah. What is it to be a Christian? Is to be somebody who knows these things and who practices that second greatest commandment.
Who knows what they believe. I think part of the problem is the labeling, that you can't have a disagreement. You can't have a different point of view and be acceptable. You're a hater. And that really then begins to erode away the potential of the common ground. Julie, how do you perceive it?
I think you're exactly right. I mean, the kind of rhetoric that we're encountering right now makes it almost impossible to have rational discussion. For example, I just published something on my blog that's about a candidate in Michigan who has ties. When he was in college, he was a part of the Muslim Student Association. Well, there's a whole litany of past presidents, vice presidents of Muslim student associations who are terrorists today. It was started, we know, by majority Muslim Brotherhood people. He has a father-in-law who was the president of the CARE for Michigan. And we know that CARE was one of the unindicted co-conspirators in this whole plot to, criminally support Hamas.
But you're guilty of Islamophobia.
Exactly. That's what you're a hater, you're not a Christian.
That's a label. My feeling, labeling, marginalizing is the greatest danger in our culture today.
And then you don't have to deal with the facts.
Because then you don't have to deal with the facts. I can label you.
Here's the thing, though, is that it's not like evangelicals have actually done the greatest job at being completely truthful. Because people are very good at doing things like, hey, we need to raise some money. So let's alarm people about every little thing that's happening. And then when you alarm people, you identify the people that are causing the alarm as something other than a human being. And
well, that's called fundraising.
Yes, it is. That's right. That's right. It's like, get people to get their wallets out to write the check. And my point is not that. Because I think part of truth telling is being able to say, look, here's just what the facts are. And if in the situation you're talking about, this has tended to happen, maybe he's not somebody who's going in that direction. Maybe he is. But to say that's a question that you at least need to be able to ask. But it needs to be able to be asked in a way where you say, now, when I say that, I'm not wishing any ill will toward that person. And it's clear that I'm not wishing any ill will toward that person. And part of what I think has happened in, the kind of culture wars disposition is that, that's kind of what's intensified to this ideological culture wars thing, where people are just so easily creating this other that's something other than a human being. And when there's something other than a human being, it's easy to condemn them. It's easy to think that they're out to get you, or to say we need to keep them out or whatever, without recognizing the fact that, wait, no, they're also image bearers.
More with our guest right after the break.
But when you're talking about trying to come together, when you have one worldview that teaches you that the problem of human suffering is all the people that believe this worldview, that's a very, very difficult issue.
Welcome back. Today, Wheaton College professor Dr. Vincent Bacote and journalist Julie Roys and I have been talking about the polarization that exists in our country today. And here's a conclusion of our conversation. Someone asked me the question, how do you feel about same-sex marriage? And my response to him, it doesn't matter one iota what I think about it. What does matter is what the Bible says about it. Can we go to the Bible? We'll take a look at it and see. And I think we start there, and then we understand where we stand on the issue, and then we say, now how then, with that understanding, do we now approach this in a way that is loving, is kind, is civil, and how then do we incorporate with that understanding? And that's what sometimes I think the church is not doing. I think it starts with we need to love the people and so forth, so love means acceptance, and so therefore we start over here rather than starting at a biblical perspective with the kind of understanding and the catechism that you're talking about in the church and so forth that I think is important.
It's interesting you bring that up, and to bring us back even to worldview. My husband, up until last year, he just retired from the public school system. He taught in the public school system 33 years. And every year he would be invited into the world religions class. And every year, as a Christian, he would be there to explain what Christianity is. And then every year he would get the question about gays. What do Christians believe about gays? And he was prepared for it. And interestingly, he said, well, before I give you that answer, let me tell you about the worldview of Christianity as opposed to the worldview that you're taught here at this high school. And so he would say, my religion tells me that I was made by a loving creator who created me and designed me. The religion at this school is that you came into existence by a series of random, purposeless processes. And then he said, my religion says that the problem with humanity is that they've sinned, that they've defied God. Your religion tells you that the problem with humanity is these religious systems that impose rules and inhibit your freedom, especially your sexual freedom. And that's what causes suffering. And he said, my religion's solution for that, for the actual problem, for the sin that we see as a problem, is the cross of Jesus Christ. It liberates us from our sin. Your solution is to basically cast off all religion, all rules, anything that would inhibit your sexual freedom. And you know, to this day, when he says that, every single time he has, the entire class, it's like a light bulb's gone in their head, and they're like, yeah, you're right, you're right. Now, they're not scandalized by that. They actually believe that, and they say, yes, that's absolutely true. But when you're talking about trying to come together, when you have one worldview that teaches you that the problem of human suffering is all the people that believe this worldview, that's a very, very difficult issue. And now we have the people that believe this infecting this and saying that the people that believe this worldview, that somehow you can combine the two, which is insanity.
But it's not as simple as that. For if a person is a person who teaches science, some of those people who teach science who may have, I wouldn't say, now there are people, I mean, I'm very troubled by what they want to, but there are some people, the way that they think they have to go about being a scientist, they've got to choose the Guild or Ken Ham, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, the presumption that everybody that teaches at a Christian college is been formed by seminary is, I mean, a pipe dream.
But I would think every science professor at Wheaton College knows the spectrum.
They do. But my point is that with the larger thing is that it's not as simple as whether people are being affected by materialism or radical individualism, etc. I think that there are the questions about how, in the case of what some people have experienced, like you're talking about the love thing, right? Yes, you need to believe this, and there's this question about loving. This, your worldview, ought to be informing already how you're going about loving somebody. And that way that you're going about loving somebody isn't by pretending that if they are, have same-sex attraction or gender dysphoria, etc., that they just need to work harder to change.
Yeah.
Or that their experience isn't their actual lived experience. You've got to attend to that while saying, I want to empathize with your suffering while coming from this.
If you can understand.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that.
I wish we had another 30 minutes. We're out of time. I'm enjoying this. Guys, thank you very much for being with me on the program. I've enjoyed it. I'd love to, at some point, pick up this discussion again. It's a great discussion. Thank you.
It's been great.
I love that.
In Romans, the 12th chapter, it says that if at all possible, live peaceably with all men. And when that was written, when the Apostle Paul wrote that, ironically, he was having a huge struggle with the Pharisees. So while he wanted to live peaceably, the truth of the gospel that he was presenting caused a controversy. And I think in the culture we live in today, it's very important that we reflect Jesus Christ in everything we do and in everything we say. But at the same time, there is a tremendous cultural war going on that will shape the future of our country. So I think it's important for Christians to stand up, to be counted, and to talk about their beliefs and let people know what they believe and stand for the truth of God's Word. But again, we have to do that in the context of reflecting Jesus Christ. There can be no anger. There cannot be bitterness. There certainly should be not hatred for those that disagree with us. And part of that dialogue is important because we learn from dialogue. We learn from that debate. We learn from being open and listening to others and seeing what they feel and the pain that they feel. And when we do that, I think that's really what the Apostle Paul was talking about. God bless.